Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Apologize for the delay, like we need to blame it on the border control in Canada, right, for being a little bit slow. Well, but this is going to be a very interesting talk where he's going to tell us all about all the research that they've been doing regarding robustness, which is something that he started working on just about before I joined the group. So, right. Professor Stern.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alex. Can you can all hear me without my shouting through that thing, can't you? Alex is being very polite. My microphone's not on. I thought I turned it back on again. You sure? It's showing on. Okay, good. Good. It must have been just borderline off. I can blame the Border Patrol, and it's true. If you took the 40 minutes away, I'd be here maybe 5 or 10 minutes ahead of time. But the truth is, this is really my fault. I should have figured this out. The last time I went back from Canada, it really was only 3 minutes. But what can I say? I'm really, really sorry to keep you waiting. The other thing is also that I'm going to give you my standard spiel that I give everywhere. And I think it's really least appropriate here because many of your colleagues here at Microsoft are doing many of the things that we're doing and have advanced beyond things that we're doing. So I fear that a lot of what I'll be telling you is not really completely new. And I'll skip over pretty quickly some things like Mike Seltzer's PhD thesis, for example, which I'm sure you've already heard plenty about. But I did want to give you a little bit of a glimpse of the kinds of things that we are currently doing at Carnegie Mellon. Again, most of which you're already doing in some measure here. But I really kind of saw this as an opportunity. I think you all know that I was at the Acoustical Society meeting in Vancouver, and I didn't want to let the opportunity go by to at least spend a few minutes here and say a few words about what we were doing, and also to have a chance to meet with a few of you individually. And I'm really, really very happy to be here. I was thinking actually the last time I was here was the last time the Acoustical Society was in the neighborhood. It was actually a little bit closer to the neighborhood. That was 1998. Both the IEEE ICAST meeting and the ASA meeting were 2 weeks apart in Seattle. I went to both of them with a brief interlude in Pittsburgh in between. I figured I'd come here during the ASA meeting rather than the IEEE meeting because I figured everybody was going to come during ICAST week, and that's probably close to true. In any case, the work that I'll be talking about is certainly not work that I've all done myself. Like anywhere, we really depend on having excellent students, excellent colleagues. Alex Athedo is one of the first. Ling-Young Gu is a current student. Shang Li recently graduated, and of course you know him from his last summer here in MSR. Pedro Moreno, many of you know, of course, also from Telefonica, long ago, and Belcor now working for Google in New York City. Biksha Raj interviewed here, and somewhat to my surprise did not come here. And currently is at Merle. Mike Seltzer, of course, I don't need to introduce. Rita Singh, I think many of you know as well. Tom Sullivan was an office mate of Alex's back when Alex was at CMU, and is still at CMU as a lecturer in my department. And Govind Tatai is a new current student. Before I go any further, I want to remind you that you have a personal invitation from the General Chair of ICSLP 2006, which, by the way, we're no longer allowed to call ICSLP. The official name is Interspeech 2006 M-ICSLP. Alex is a member of the organizing committee, so he'll be the Microsoft rep if we need one. But I sincerely hope and quite frankly expect that many of you will come. It's going to be a real good meeting. And Pittsburgh is just an easy plane ride from here. Now that US Air has merged with America West, it's probably going to be less expensive. We don't have JetBlue yet, but we do have Southwest. And Pittsburgh, for those of you who haven't been there, is really a lovely city. It will surprise you. The weather should be just fine in September, and the meeting is going to be, oh gee, can I find it? Yeah, here we go. It's, you can't really see it, but it's behind this building, right around here. The ballpark is here. There are nice running trails along here, not this way, and it's going to be a great meeting. So please circle those dates in your calendars, September 17 to 21. Now, as far as robust speech recognition is concerned, and again, I realize full well I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but as speech recognition is transferred from the laboratory to the marketplace, of course, robust recognition is becoming extremely important. In 1985, and I mark this because this is when Alex entered the lab, give or take a year maybe. I think you came in fall of '87, did you not? Yeah. But anyway, in 1985, which is a convenient date to mark when I started working in this area about 20 years ago, robust recognition was pretty benign in our context. All it meant was you were working in a quiet microphone, in a quiet room rather, using a desktop microphone rather than a close talking microphone. The PZM6FS was very popular because that's what IBM used, and none of the rest of us wanted to make a decision about what to buy. So we figured if it was good enough for IBM, it was good enough for us. Now, of course, we look to Microsoft for leadership in that regard. Nowadays, of course, it's a whole other can of fish. We talk about robust recognition to be something like recognition over a cell phone in a car with the windows down and the radio playing at highway speeds. And that's a much more difficult problem for many reasons. And we can cope with some of those problems, but certainly not all of them. Some of the real hard problems in speech today, this is one of my favorite recordings. Oh, we have audio here? I forgot to ask. Yeah. This was a recording that Mike Seltzer actually made at the Patuxent Naval Base. And one of my other things, I actually have a video clip of this. The two of us are walking around on the ramp at the Pax River Naval Base where F-18s are cruising by. And this was through the Navy's most powerful noise-canceling microphones.
Well, the God of heaven forgive me.
And there's a
Divert me against my
that's
God.
Mike. That's Mike Seltzer, a voice that you recognize. That's tough noise because it's very narrowly focused. So the thing that you'd most obviously try would be adaptive noise canceling because it's easy enough to put a reference microphone somewhere. But with the noise narrow like that, the eigenvectors are very spread, and standard noise cancellation, adaptive filtering algorithms like LMS or even RLS don't really work very well, and that's been vexing. Speech and background music, of course, is tough. Let's see.
Es la visión del mundo desde Hispanoamérica para todos quienes hablamos español. Por nuestra parte ha sido todo, Verónica. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a usted por su atención y compañía. Y hasta la próxima.
You can have Alex translate that for you if you want. I have more examples from this because that was part of a talk I gave somewhere in Mexico. But the average news station, regardless of whether it's CNN or Fox or your local network news at 5 p.m., doesn't like to go more than a moment or two without juicing the audio with something in the background. And that, of course, makes it hard. Background speech is also
En
a
el
problem.
Capitolio los republicanos dijeron que es un presupuesto para los jóvenes.
Suits up, armed.
That's transient dropouts of noise. That was from the spine task. Reverberated speech.
PITTSBURGH.
Okay, that, as many of you know, is a real hard problem. Spontaneous speech, of course, if I can find the cursor, this is a Microsoft product, so I should be able to here, is...
Where did you grow up?
This is from, where was this? This was from the SRI Multi-Res Corpus. You all know what that means. Where did you grow up? And this is a favorite example from AT&T that I'm sure Ken has heard.
My reveries were shattered by a loud crash.
That's an example of speech going through the, I think, 24 kilobit per second vocoder, which is the LPC standard for a long time. This is the end of a long demo tape that Rich Cox put together many years ago that I've been milking for early speech course demo. So as you well know, speech recognition accuracy degrades in noise. The lower curve there is for, I think this is from Pedro's thesis. And so I think that would be Wall Street Journal with additive noise, kind of an artificial experiment. And the upper curve is what we get with complete retraining at every SNR. Data points are smoothed over. So, I look at this upper curve, rightly or wrongly, as a measure of the best possible performance you could get for that particular recognizer, which is not a very good one, and that particular task, which is not a very difficult one. Ken?
If you were to add a line for sort of human level performance,
Oh, human level? Well,
be off the chart.
Well, sooner or later it would come down too.
Right.
But what I try to pay attention to is the difference, the horizontal displacement between this curve and this curve, in kind of the threshold extension. Rich Lippmann, of course, did a lot of comparisons in the late 90s of human performance versus speech recognition performance, and of course the humans won hands down in every category. It wasn't even a fair fight. But he didn't look very hard at noise, and in fact you will, sooner or later it will come down. And in fact, we could probably look up the numbers somewhere.
And non-native speakers come down before native speakers, aren't they?
I would imagine so. I mean, certainly when I'm in Spain or Mexico or something like that and I want to have a conversation in a hotel, more likely I'll go down to the lobby to have the conversation in person rather than talk over the telephone. No matter how good my Spanish might be, it still is easier if I see the person and get those additional cues, even if I've never been taught to lip read. So yeah, absolutely. But this, of course, is a Native American, North American speaking recognition system in an in-domain task. Now, the other thing, again, that's not as obvious, but certainly is to those who study it, recognition accuracy does degrade in reverberated rooms. So here's a measurement. Actually, Mike Seltzer put these together when he was at CMU. This is speech passing through various impulse responses that were recorded at ATR with different nominal reverb times. I'm only going to play a few of them. So here's the clean speech.
Pittsburgh.
Recognize the speaker, Alex? It's Tom from his database, Tom Sullivan. This is about 200 milliseconds reverb time, actually about 300 milliseconds reverb time.
Pittsburgh.
And then the next data point that we have, these were from real rooms, so we couldn't manipulate. We only had quantum availability of things. Is up here. This is about 470 milliseconds reverb time.
Pittsburgh.
It's interesting to me that the big jump in word error rate occurs just about the point where we humans start perceiving, substantial echoes, because you can see it's kind of cruising along down there, and then it kind of pops up, and then it gets a little worse, but not a lot worse. And you take the big hit. At least we take the big hit, and I would imagine that you would too. Somewhere between about 300 400 milliseconds of reverb time. For whatever it's worth, here's the flat out, the largest one sounds like this.
Pittsburgh.
And that's not actually that much worse. The yellow curve is word error rate for just a normal system, and the green curve is with delay and some beamforming. You can see delay and some, I think that was with about either 7 or 15 sensors from Tom Sullivan's thesis. Yeah, it's a little better, but it doesn't dramatically change the picture. We'll talk more about that later.
What would be a room with the largest?
Oh, yeah, good-sized Catholic church.
What's weird about that curve is that the delay in some will, of course, increase your signal-to-noise ratio by square root of n, but at the same time, it also increases the reverberation because you get that many more echoes from the...
Well, the echoes are still there, but of course the purpose of the delay in some is to kind of line things up. So the philosophy behind it is the presumption is that the echoes are coming from every direction, and the speaker is coming from one direction, and so the idea is to get the signal in phase in all the sensors by canceling any possible path length differences between the sound source and the individual microphones, and then pray that there'll be some cancellation of everything else. I mean that's really all that you can do, but it's still reasonably effective, as Jim Flanagan of course has shown. If you have gobs and gobs of microphones, And it's one of the nice things about delay in some beamforming, as kind of brute force-ish as it is that you don't have signal cancellation and other effects that render smarter algorithms ineffective in reverberant environments. We can talk a little bit more about that when we get to that. So anyway, so challenges in robust recognition. I have my own personal taxonomy for that. And first we have classical problems. And these are basically problems that are already solved, the kind of problems that Alex dealt with in 1988 to 1990. Unknown additive noise, unknown linear filtering, they're classic solutions. They work, we can reproduce them, we pass out software, and it works to some degree, and everybody's happy. Modern problems I think of as things that are currently challenging but confrontable with the kinds of things that we're throwing at the problems now. Transient degradations and just plain lower signal-to-noise ratios fall into that category. And then finally, difficult problems. And I mean difficult in the sense that the Japanese mean difficult. If you're in Japan and you ask to get something done and they say, this will be very difficult. What it means is they can't do it and they don't want to tell you. But anyway, those are difficult problems. And difficult problems in this sense is certainly highly spontaneous speech. It's a little vexing to me that there is, to my mind, as yet no interesting solution to highly spontaneous speech other than training on lots of highly spontaneous speech, and that's what everybody seems to do. You guys are ahead of the rest of the world, and maybe you'll tell me something that I didn't already know about this today. But in any case, that's one area. Speech masked by other speech is quite important, and that's the object of a lot of current attention right now. And speech masked by music. And kind of what's in common about speech, both masking speech maskers and music maskers, is A, they're very transient, and B, they're a lot like the target speech. And both of those, the transient nature is problematic for classic Arthurian ways of treating things, for example. And the speech-like nature, which is true certainly for speech maskers and music maskers to some extent, also is tough because that gets you into signal separation problems. And I'll talk a little bit about that toward the end. All right, so classical solutions. We had a whole string of theses going from Alex basically to Pedro. And I think that was a point at which we kind of squeezed all the blood that we could out of those rocks. But it lasted for a whole run of PhD theses and a lot of master's students, and it was very fortunate that Alex came along when he did. But in any case, basically the name of the game is we assume that, and this is of course the block diagram that shows up in Alex's thesis, and really for the first time in the associated papers, even though now you'll see it in any book like the one from here, including that one. But in any case, we imagine a model of degraded speech as you take clean speech, you pass it through an unknown linear filter, and then subject it to unknown additive noise. And what makes that an interesting problem is that in either the log spectral or the capsule domain, the noise and the filter combine in a nonlinear fashion. So you have to use classic nonlinear estimation techniques like EM and so forth. But basically the name of the game is to try to guess what the parameters of the filter or the noise are, and then undo them in the usual fashion, and that gives you an approximation of clean speech, which then, if you trained a system on clean speech, gives you better performance than you had before. Here's this is from Pedro's thesis. This are some abstractions of results of comparing a few different algorithms. The same baseline and complete retraining curves that you saw before. This is the curve that we get with CDCN from Alex's thesis. This is the curve that we get from VTS from Pedro's thesis. And again, the way I like to look at this is if you go this way, it's about a shift of about 7 dB or so. And you can say, 7 dB, that's not very much. But the truth is that if you're in this region here, it's the difference between not doing much of anything at all and getting to nearly complete performance. And that's a useful benefit under many circumstances. And there are a lot of situations that are working in this part of the envelope. So it's, where we are with that is that, basically you get a threshold shift of about 7 dB. But, once you're below 5 dB or so signal-to-noise ratio, and by the way, this is our measurement of SNRs, not the NIST measurement. We just look at the energy of the signal, we look at the energy of the noise, and we add them together. NIST is more pessimistic because, in fact, we had this, I'm a little chagrined about this, but we noted many, many years ago that when we took our measures and we took the NIST measures, their measures were always 7 dB worse. And it was only within the last year that I realized that the way NIST measures SNR is they look at something like the 97th percentile of the speech and the 50th percentile of the noise. That's, why you get the difference. If you look at the 50th and the 50th, you get about the same thing we get. Anyway, I thought one of the things that we've been looking at lately, and this is actually picking up something that Aki Oshima, Alex's other roommate, office mate at CMU, originally did for his thesis, is I wanted to reconstruct signals from Kepler coefficients after they've been reconstituted, just to hear what they sound like. These are not very good. I'm playing them for you only because they're amusing. I think the artifact is a phase artifact, and I just haven't had a chance to deal with it. I'm just telling you, this is not a finished product, but nevertheless amusing. And since you've already seen all these other curves before, I figured I'd got to tell you something new. So here's a clean utterance, if I can find the cursor.
She had your dark suit in greasy wash water all year.
That, of course, is the dialect calibration sentence from the, what was it, the timid corpus, was it? Yeah, all right. So here's 13 dB, and again, I don't trust these numbers for 13 dB because it sounds better than that.
She had your dark suit in greasy wash water all year.
Does that sound like 13 dB? Anyway, so recovered from with CDCN actually was this. You get.
She had your dark suit in greasy wash water all year.
So to my mind, that doesn't sound as intelligible, but it does sound less noisy. Again, I do think it can get better. Here's the same thing, 5 or 6 dB lower.
She had your dark suit in greasy wash water all year. She had your dark suit in greasy wash water all year.
So it's interesting to me that the speech recognition systems do better on the second signal than they do on the first signal, because that's all the information that's in there, but it appears that they do. Yeah?
Have you listened to what happens to the clean?
To the clean? Oh, nothing.
So,
because what we're doing is reconstructing from Kepler coefficients, and then exciting it by the original residual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The original signal effect.
So did you have an experiment where you used the recovered speech to train the whole system?
We've never tried that. We might do that. One reason why we haven't done anything like that is that, again, I think there is an artifact in that reconstruction, and I want to clean that up before wasting a lot of time on that. And again, I think it's that we're not treating phase properly.
But to train the system, you don't need to regenerate the waveform. You can just train with the capsule.
Well, yeah, but that's right. Of course, then that's the question of detraining the. You did that, didn't you? That's okay.
Yeah. We found that it's better than complete retraining.
Yeah, say it again.
It's better than complete retraining.
Better than complete retraining.
Oh yeah.
Did you do that when you were CMU or just here?
Here.
2000 ICSLP.
2000 ICSLP. I was in China then. I was too tired. Thank you. That's an interesting thing. Yeah.
So why do you think the recovered sounds bad to us because of artifacts and bugs in the phase, or do you think there's more than that?
Well, I think there's at least that, and until I fix that, I won't know the answer to the bigger question. There certainly is, but I think, sure, there's more than that, because what happens is that, anytime the local signal-to-noise ratio is low, the algorithm will kind of wipe out everything. That's why you hear the big gaps at the lower SNRs. Whereas we'll have this kind of perceptual continuity that'll enable us to kind of fill in what's missing. Whereas,
like the nonlinear optimization, the EM, can make some really horrible mistakes.
Yeah. Now, an interesting experiment, which of course we haven't done, is to take the recovered speech and then add noise back on top of that. Because that should at least perceptually fill in the same thing.
Thing that if I can't hear it too well, I'll hear the right thing.
Yeah. But on the other hand, of course, once you lose the information, you've lost it, and you're not going to get it. So all we're really talking about is an illusion that might make stuff sound better. I don't know. I think many of you read Jay Lim's book, Speech Enhancement, which was kind of extension of his thesis, and this is a while ago, of course, 1983, and the book is out of print. but it still, to my mind, was a very interesting study. He looked at all the classic things then, which were the same algorithms that are the basis for robust recognition. I mean, in those days, spectral subtraction showed up in the late 1970s. Tom Stockham's article on homomorphic deconvolution was in the early 1970s, and those are kind of the precursors to the dozens of articles on spectral subtraction and things like VTS that have appeared since then, and capsule mean normalization and stuff like that. But in each case, Jay did a bunch of studies. They did that. There was comb filtering, which is also popular nowadays. In fact, we do it too. He noted that although the speech sounded better, if you ran an objective intelligibility experiment like diagnostic rhyme test, you wouldn't do any better in objective discrimination, again, because the information wasn't there. So a lot of things, even though people like to listen to it because it was less fatiguing perhaps. And my first observation was, when I first started out in this business, a lot of those same techniques, even though they didn't help for human perception, they did help a lot for machine perception. Things like capsule mean normalization, spectral subtraction, they work quite well. And that, to my mind, is just a reflection of how brain damaged speech recognition systems really are, at least at baseline. That even, and how much additional context information we as humans use, which of course makes the goal that Ken raised about having machine performance approach human performance quite difficult to realize in practice. Anyway, so that was speech and noise. What we're looking at here is, this is some data that Biksha Raj presented in Munich. That was the 1997 ICAST, if my memory serves me correctly. The curve here is percent improvement of white noise, is the green curve. And you'd expect something like that to be low at the top end because without much noise, you're going to do well with or without processing. And at the bottom end, it's not going to be very good either because ultimately you'll get clobbered, even with some kind of compensation because the noise will just overwhelm everything. But in the middle, there is that sweet spot, and that's the part of the signal-to-noise ratio where we had that 7 dB improvement, and where we would get about a 30, 40%, even approaching 50% improvement in word error rate, at least for certain SNRs. On the other hand, for Hub4 music played at the various SNRs, there's very little improvement. In fact, in other experiments, there's frequently no improvement at all with compensation. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One of them is, of course, that the music can sound like the speech and therefore get confused for it. But more than anything, all of those algorithms like CDC on VTS would sniff the environment for about a second or so and run on approximate, assume that you're in a quasi-stationary situation during that time. And if you're not, then you'll get clobbered. So that was an issue for us. So hard problems for speech recognition include low SNRs, transient disturbances, co-channel speech and music, reverberance, also spontaneous speech and coding for speech channels. Those two last ones I'm not going to talk a thing about, even during the talk. I may not talk about some of the others either, but I certainly want to talk about those. Although we play around with them, but we don't have anything to go. Actually, quite frankly, I think your work in spontaneous speech, the string of papers that Lee, Yasha, and Alex have been coming out is, I think, the most interesting thing that I've seen in spontaneous speech. We're kind of trying to. That's the sort of stuff where you go to a paper, you go to a meeting, you hear about this stuff, and you say, "Oh, geez, I wish I'd thought about that." We're still working hard to try to come up with some way of dealing with a problem that you guys haven't already suddenly done right before we get to doing it. But that's one reason. The other reason is we haven't done anything very interesting yet. So what do we hope to? How can we deal with those? Well, we spent a lot of time talking about recognition using missing features. In fact, the last time I came out here, I think I spent most of the time talking about that and not much else. And I do think that missing feature approaches are an important way of dealing with transient problems. We're also very interested in a combination of parallel information streams, including multiband analysis, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. Microphone array processing, of course, which we do, or at least we did until you inherited Mike, and we still do somewhat. Also, I've become more interested in revisiting physiologically motivated feature extraction. Now, Lee, of course, has been doing this for at least as long as I have been. I took it up in the mid-'80s and then put it down because I didn't think that we could do anything then with the computation that we had at hand, but now I do think that we do. And also, I'm working a lot right now on processing, dealing with cues from auditory scene analysis, and I will say a few words about that. I don't have any great results, but I'll tell you some of the things we're doing. Give you a few demos. And time normalization, John Nettles' thesis is out and about. And Pedro Moreno, not Pedro, Juan Huerta, when he was here, did work on modeling and recognition based on coded parameters. Those also help quite a bit. Anyway, let's talk for a few minutes about missing features. I'm not going to give you the full-blown stuff because I know you know all this stuff anyhow. But just to put it in a certain context, the basic idea is you take a display like a spectrogram-like display and try to figure out which cells are reliable or missing. And then you either ignore those cells that are unreliable or missing, or make the best guess about what their values might have been and then try to put them back in, impute their values, and then act as if they were there. And at CMU, and I use that term metaphorically because Victor hasn't been at CMU now for about 5 years, but at quote-unquote CMU, we work with the incoming features, and we did that partly because it was easier, and but more than anything is that if you work with the incoming features and fill them in, then you can use any kind of coefficients at all. Whereas the classic work done by Sheffield, of course, and Phil Green and Martin Cook deservedly get credit for putting this on the foreburner. They've really done terrific work over an extended period of time. John Barker and a couple of others have carried on with that. But they prefer to modify the classifier. The reason for that, of course, is reasonably well motivated. If you have features coming in here and you have a pattern recognition system here, you can either, and they're different for some odd reason, you can either try to make the features more look like the models, or you can make the models look more like the features. And the advantage of doing the latter is that by incorporating the differences into the modeling, you can make use of covariance information and variance information, whereas typically the incoming feature normalization schemes are based just on characteristics of the means. So you can work from a more accurate statistical model, which, with all other things being equal, would certainly give you better results. On the other hand, in this situation, all other things are not equal, and the big hang-up that we see as a problem, and they keep arguing as a non-problem, but nevertheless, they don't have a good, not non-solution to the non-problem that's impressed me, at least, as of now. But the big thing is that the mathematics become very awkward if you don't deal with log spectral coefficients as the realm that you're operating in. And we feel that the advantage that you incur by being able to work with Kepler coefficients and their putative orthogonality rather than log spectral coefficients overcomes the loss that you get by throwing away the opportunity to exploit covariance information. Anyway, this is a set of slides, by the way, that I created late at night before I came here last time in the Sheraton in downtown Seattle. It's right by the Space Needle, and I remember staying up all night watching those I don't know, what do they call them, the monorails? Came by. I was on the 6th floor. So the train would come, and then just right at the last minute would come like right to my window and then turn to the side. Never hit me once. But it was a lot of fun to watch. So, anyway, so while I wasn't watching the trains almost hit me over and over again, I created these, and I have been using them ever since. I never did this again. So this is a speech spectrogram, and this is what it looks like with a noise at 15 dB. And of course, the most important thing is that if you flash it back and forth, the information remains the same at the hills, and then of course the valleys get filled in. So it's pretty obvious that if we do that corrupted ourselves, we know what the good what the invariant points are, and they're those things. And indeed, we can work from just those and nothing else, and do a real good job recognizing. I actually took Victor Zoo's course one summer in 1985, and for about a week or so, I could read these things myself. I don't know if they did this when you went there, but the last day we went down to Central Square and had dinner at a Chinese restaurant, and in order to get the food, we had to, each table I had to identify the spectrograms. But as I said, this was not this lasted a lot less long for me than it did for Victor. And what that is me saying welcome to DSP-1, but I know that because I have a lot of prior information about that. And anyway, so From Bhiksha Raj's thesis, these are recognition results that we get from two kinds of cluster-based recognition, and this is actually what now we call correlation-based mean imputation. And with white noise in the background, the baseline is here. This is a huge difference, about 15 dB. But of course, the big if is that assumes perfect knowledge of which spectra, which pixels are degraded and which ones are not. And this is one of these problems that if only I could do this, then I could do that real well. But doing this is hard. And so big difference, but again, this is using so-called oracle knowledge of which are the good pixels, which are the bad ones. This is the same thing for music, and as you can see, well, I don't know if you can see or not, the spectral subtraction curve, which is in this case is more or less what VTS or CDCN would give us, is right on top of the baseline, and there still is very substantial improvement, even at really quite low SNR. So this is the potential is huge to get some benefit from stuff like this. Now, what we can do in real life is use some kind of ad hoc Bayesian procedures to estimate what the where the good and the bad pixels are. These are results from Mike Seltzer's master's thesis, which you may be less familiar with than you are with the microphone array work. And the red curve is the oracle knowledge. This is with white noise in the background baseline here. So we get really, depending on how you count, about comparing this to this to this, about between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way there, or if you want to look at the threshold shift, we're getting better than 10 dB improvement, and that gives us a curve that's operable at a lower SNR. And we probably could also work with CDCN or VTS in the background after applying the missing feature compensation as well. With music, we get results aren't quite so good, but they're certainly better than nothing. This is the baseline. Spectral subtraction or energy-based masks is worse than baseline. And then the improvement here is we're about 1/3 the way toward getting there. In general, we do pretty well with, you can read all the details in Mike's master's thesis, which is available online, and I'm sure if you went down the hall once he gets back from Virgin Islands, he'd be happy to tell you the story himself. But we do real well with the voice segments, and we do pretty poorly with the unvoiced segments. Actually, we don't do terribly. We do like 75% with the unvoiced segments, but the difference between doing 75% and 100% translates to a phenomenal difference in recognition accuracy. So again, if somebody could be more clever about how to do this, there certainly is an opportunity here. But Mike's a bright guy, and it's not an easy problem, but I think that this isn't the last word on that. Yeah?
What are the relative contributions, though? I would imagine that the unvoiced segment, degradation in unvoiced segment recognition should hurt you less in overall word error rate than degradation in voice segment recognition, or are they both?
Yeah, you'd think they would, but I don't know. Certainly if you look at the frames, there are a lot more voiced frames than unvoiced frames.
Yeah.
And if you look at the percentage that we get compared with the oracle speech, we don't miss that much. Again, it's if chance is 50%, we're running around 75%, which is about threshold for a good psychoacoustical experiment. But I don't know. If we could do 80%, it would be a lot better. But it's hard, and it's particularly hard if you don't know a priori what the nature of the noise is. And music, of course, is very heterogeneous. There's a lot of stuff everywhere. So multiband recognition, I think many of you are familiar with this work. We don't do it ourselves. But this was originally popularized by the triumvirate of Avery Ballard, maybe not originally, but they were certainly among the most vociferous advocates of it. Hervé, Nelson Morgan, and Hinek Romansky, who migrates between various places, including some that used to be not too far from here. But the idea originally, in the original formulation, which is why it was called multiband, was you divide the spectrum into different bands, and train separate recognition systems in the different bands and then recombine things. And the standard classical demo example was a sine wave, and you wouldn't pay attention to the band that had the sine wave, and then you'd recover quite nicely. Now, of course, multiband is kind of a metaphor for a lot of other things, and any kind of combination, at least the way they use it, any kind of combination of information. The original frequency stuff, of course, is motivated by observations of Harvey Fletcher and then repeated ad nauseum by John Dallin who's, again, been very effective in promoting Fletcher in the 21st century, that, again, we do appear to process speech on a band-by-band basis and combine information. There are a lot of obvious questions about, how many bands, how to do the splits and merges, and I'll frame that in a more general fashion in a few moments. But thinking about missing features versus multiband recognition, the IDIA group, for example, still does, and the ICSI group to a lesser degree still does multiband in the original context. And one of the things that they do now is the so-called full combination method, in which they kind of skirt the question of which bands to pay attention to and which bands not to by simply trying all the combinations. If you have a decently small number of bands, like where n is somewhere between 5 and 15, you can look at something and then do all the possible factorial combinations of bands. Look at the look at the a posteriori probability of observing what you observe, given each of the possible combination, and choose them. And they have a way of doing this at least a little bit efficiently. So, assuming that what that does is gives you the the correct band or combination of band, or the best possible combination of bands, the way I kind of look at it is that if we're taking a look at missing feature approach, what we're doing is we're taking a spectrogram and quantizing it, kind of according to pixels. So that we're dividing it into pixels and looking at each pixel individually. If we're looking at multi-band and we only have, say, 5 to 15 bands, we have basically we have a band quantization effect. We have many, many fewer divisions, and so it's a much coarser division of the representation. And so the trade-off is between, in my mind at least, I'm not sure there's any, real practical benefit from seeing things this way, but to my mind it's a useful way for me to frame this intellectually. For my mind, with the multiband approach, you can pretty much do quote-unquote perfectly in getting that, but then you're stuck with a quantization noise, which is the fact that you've kind of partitioned the representation space in a rather crude fashion. With missing feature work, you don't have you have a much finer partitioning, you have a much less quantization noise, but then you have this, if you want to think of it in the communications metaphor, you have this transmission loss that you're not making the right guess all the time about whether a pixel is present or absent. So I guess you can choose your poisons, and one of the things that I'd be interested in doing that we've simply never gotten around to doing is straight up comparisons using one approach versus the other. Hynek and I talk about doing this from time to time, but there always are either more important things or more urgent things or both, and so it hasn't gotten done yet. It's a good summer project for somebody. Anyway, that's the way I think of it. Yeah.
Is the multiband approach, is it typically only in frequency then, so it's a constant?
No. They do other things too. For example, they did some experiments in reverberation. They trained something clean and trained something reverberated. Basically you can partition things any way you want. Okay. But if you're going to go away from multiband, then there are better, more general ways of thinking about that problem. And let's talk about that right now. So generalization of multiband analysis is information fusion, and as thank you, led so nicely that the partitioning doesn't need to be frequency by frequency. Any combination of information can be useful. The main thing is that we want to get a complementary look at what comes in, and that's kind of emotionally appealing because, after all, when you and I try to make some judgment about things, we try to look at it from every possible angle, and our perceptual systems work in the same fashion. There are many kind of parallel representations, and various aspects
have to be complementary. I mean, if it's totally dependent, you don't get any new insight. But if there were any independence at all, you would.
Well, sure. So the idea, if you're assuming a finite number of channels, just because we're ultimately limited computationally, even in this day and age, the more complementary, the more value you'll get from the secondary channels. But this isn't a binary thing. We're striving to find ways of, and most of the experiments that we've gotten so far, quite frankly, have been through using different representations that, as far as I can see, are not very complementary at all. And we're still getting a little bump. I'll show you some numbers about that in a second. Combination of information streams. We can start by thinking, for example, of three systems, at least in this case. We have the feature extraction, the acoustic representation, and actually the HMMs themselves. And one place to combine with is at the point where the features are. And feature combination approaches would include things like linear LDA or or principal component analysis, or just simply concatenating the features. Typically, the first thing you'll do is concatenate features, and then maybe you'll try to do something to reduce the total number of features to make life more manageable. And that's the first place. The second place is so-called state combination, and that actually is popular partly because it works the best. And that's actually doing the combination at the level where you do the graph search and combining things there. And yeah?
I missed that.
If you have two HMMs and they're kind of running in tandem and parallel, and you get a probability from one and a probability from the other, then you combine the two probabilities in some fashion. Typically, the things that have been used because they're trivial are either adding the probabilities or multiplying them together or taking the maximum. Or
remap would be an example of this.
What?
Everybody's remap system.
Yeah. Yeah. They use typically they like to use perceptrons. I'm blanking on the name. I don't know. It's what happens when you get old. Multi-layer perceptrons. But there are a lot of ways of doing it. And then the last thing you can do is so-called output combination. Just generate a bunch of hypotheses, and the rover method was an early application of this, which in retrospect is trivial, but actually was quite insightful. This is one of the most interesting things that I think NIST has come up with over the years, and there are better ways of doing output combination with more information than that. And these three things also correspond to what the audio-visual fusion people call, early combination, a middle combination, a late combination, and you hear those terms in the speech world as well. This isn't rocket science, but it's a good way to kind of sort through the morass of things that you can read about if you were so inclined to do all that reading. An early example of output combination, which was very helpful for us, was Rita Singh's work. So here's a trivial example of some output hypotheses. These numbers are frame numbers, and the scores are scores. So, for example, here Southwest was combined across two hypotheses, and the scores were combined by turning the scores into probabilities, adding the probabilities, and turning back into scores again. Which these are like log probabilities or negative log probabilities, I forget. And over here, of course, these were combined too, and basically things in hypotheses, wherever you had the common starting and ending times, you try to put them together and merge the scores as necessary. Then the task was just kind of going through these two scores, and the bottom line is that if you have a situation where you're doing pruning during the recognition phase, you have an opportunity to recover hypotheses that don't exist in any single output hypothesis.
Yes, the problem with this is that if you take sub-band, maybe break your frequency into several bands, then one of those must be very poor. Right? You cannot allow information out.
I agree with you. We tried that at some point. I was interested in the fact that we always say that the reason why auditory filters are narrow at low frequencies and broad at high frequencies is that you want to have narrow filtering at low frequencies so you can get good spectral resolution. And having it be broad at high frequencies gives you the opportunity to get good temporal resolution. And with the standard, kind of analysis that most of us do, you have a constant window length, so you throw away all the, you throw away all the sharp temporal resolution that you could get at high frequencies. So I had somebody do a multiband with different window lengths. Of course, the wavelet people, exploit this. Les Atlas was an early one of those guys. But to my mind, they haven't really gotten anything that's been dramatically better, which
but I think it would be more reasonable to have different kind of spectral representation, like PLP versus MF.
Yeah, well.
When you do that, of course, it would be better than breaking up the whole.
Well, here we are. This wasn't that recent. This is year 2000. This was the system, one of the winning systems for the spine evaluation. So we had MFCC coefficients here, PLP coefficients here. This was, Rita called this Bernoulli, but really what it is really is not that, but it's MFCCs of a low-pass representation. I don't remember exactly why she wanted to do that, but that's what it is. In any case, forget about all that stuff. The only part that's relevant to what I'm talking about here is if you look at the word error rates, 35, 38, and 47.4, you combine them with hypothesis combination, you get 32.8, which is lower than the lowest of the individual ones. And that was interesting to me because, quite frankly, we played around with PLP, and it's not that much different from MFCCs. So these are not highly complementary ways of looking at things. They're just a little bit different. And that kind of spurred us on a search for trying to come up with more complementary features in a more systematic fashion. Shang Li's PhD thesis, which I think some of you are at least familiar with, was one thing that came out of that work. But, and I'll say a word or two about that in a moment, but I don't think it's the last result. He kind of got off on a different tangent and got away from the original problem that I wanted to look at, but these things happen. So in any case, just going up to here, again, with that, we get a better number than we got from any of the individual representations, and those individual representations weren't that dramatically different from one another. I don't know if any of you were there. It was one of the DARPA meetings in D.C. Francis Kabbalah had a wonderful presentation. In fact, I loved it so much that I had him send me the slides. So if you want to stay for another hour and a half, I'll give you his talk too. It's on my computer. But one of the real gems in there that he did was that he noted that in those days, NIST used to take Rover, which was the only output combination routine that we had, and they would combine all the results of all the various different sites and come up with a new number. At the same time, sites that seem to have unlimited energy and unlimited computer cycles, like Cambridge and BBN, would typically love to take their, they do whatever they did, they'd massage the data about 10 times, and then the last thing they would do is they take the last 10 iterations and then put them all through Rover. And what Francis observed was that in the first case, when you were combining information across different sites, you get a pretty healthy bump. The Rover combined system, community-wide system, was substantially different. On the other hand, when you combine just the last 5 decoder passes from your own site, you get only a tiny margin of improvement. I mean, people do it because it was free, and that might give you the last tenth of a point that would enable you to beat SRI. Actually, in those days, SRI was easy to beat. It would enable you to beat Cambridge or LIMSI. That would be something. So people would do it. But so the comment that Francis made was that this only works if you have a lot of different genetic material. And I don't know what it is in those genes, but it's the cross-fertilization, and again, to my mind, complementariness that makes it work. But
that's not the case here,
huh? No, that's not the case there at all. No. So and that's not a dramatic improvement either. Going from what? From 35 to 32 is about a 10% improvement. I'll take it, but I'd rather have a 50% improvement. In fact, these are, again, a couple of elaborations to that. This is basically a recap of the same figure I just showed you. Filtered MFC, PLP, MFCC, combine them together and you do better than the best. And of course, there's, keep in mind that there's a penalty here that you have to run 3 recognizers. So you've incurred a tripling of your computational costs pretty much from the get-go. So this is...
Coming back to my original question, if you break up maybe PLP in that diagram into maybe 3 bands or 4 bands, and then break up MFC or PLP, you get a 6 rather than 2.
So we think you should do better, but the problem is that some of those, you have to make sure that each of those bands has enough information to make a pretty good decision in itself.
Yeah, but if you do the maybe that 35 probably will go to about 45 or something.
The 45 or 25?
No, individual one probably will drop a lot. The error will increase a lot, or maybe 40, 35 to 40. So, well, maybe in the lower band, you probably still maintain similar to 37 or something.
Right.
And then you combine 37% with 40%, 45% at high frequency. You expect that to come down to 32 or something?
I don't know. The one data point that I did is we had 3 different frequency bands, and the highest frequency band was so bad that it just dragged everything else down.
Yeah, that would happen like for Rover. You happen, right? You take the vote.
Yeah. You're just adding a noise source.
And then in that case, how do they justify their multiband approach? I thought this is a fundamental problem with the multiband approach.
Well, I don't know. I think I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the difference there is that they're not using output combination. They're not. I'm talking about this in terms of if you have something where there's not a lot of information, and then you have to get an output, and you're basing just on the outputs, then you're going to get clobbered. But if they do, say, state combination, then what they'll say is that they're just ignoring the states that don't tell you much, and you can recover enough. It's really another kind of missing feature reconstruction. And I think that's the key to why they do decently, even though they have that situation. These are without combination. This is, again, different compensation schemes. No compensation, Garhunalo, single value decomposition, VTS, CDCN. And again, the combination was better than the best. But we didn't use it because it wasn't as good as the different front ends. So, this is more recent work. This was just an abstraction of numbers from Shang Li's PhD thesis. Some of you might not have seen that. Let me explain this for a moment. It's a little terse, and there's a lot of information here. Shang did a bunch of different experiments. He did experiments with hypothesis combination. He did experiments just looking at feature combination. And one of the things that he was interested in doing was comparing output versus state versus input or early, middle, late recognition accuracy. But he was also interested in optimizing the features themselves. And he had a fairly specific way of optimizing the features. He would choose a certain combination function and then simply take two features that he chose sort of arbitrarily, and pretty much they were linear discriminant analysis and principal component analysis most of the way. And then try to pass them through an arbitrary linear transformation that would increase the performance, or increase the overall a posteriori probability of observing the data after the combination. And so that would give you, and that was the difference between the red curves. So, here's PLP and MFCCs by themselves. You can see we generally do better in our system with malfrequency capsule coefficients, which is why we never use PLP as a primary feature extraction stuff. For feature combination, let's see. Yeah, so for feature combination, we do a little bit better. And let's see. This is hypothesis combination, lattice combination, and state combination. Lattice combination is a very computationally expensive way of doing hypothesis combination that does a tiny bit better. So given those two statements, we don't use it that much. But the more interesting comparison is hypothesis combination versus state combination. So if you look at the yellow bars, these are just PCA and LDA features running through hypothesis combination and running through state combination. You can see that you do better with state combination. And that's pretty much universally observed. I don't know if you've done that same experiment here, but I know that ICSI's done it, and they come with the same results, that the hypothesis combination is easier to implement than state combination, but it doesn't give you as good recognition accuracy. The other interesting thing is that, again, these optimized features, that is that you get a real big kick. You get a modest improvement for hypothesis combination. You get a big improvement for state combination, where you don't use the features directly, but you kind of optimize them through this linear combination. This was discussed, well, it's actually described in his thesis, but also was presented in the Korean ICSLP last fall. It's a pretty big difference. One of the things I asked him was, why PCA and LDA features, and I think the explanation was that they do kind of give you a different thing. PCA tries to minimize the dimensionality, and LDA tries to, increase discriminability within a particular dimensionality. We haven't systematically tried other kinds of features. We've kind of ad hocly tried them, the same obvious suspects like MFCCs and PLP coefficients, and they don't do as well as PCA versus LDA. The other caveat here is that these experiments were done in resource management. If you go to Wall Street Journal, the improvement is somewhat less, and if you go to a big task like broadcast news or switchboard, the improvement is still less. And in fact, that's a general problem that we observe with everything. And that is, as you go from a smaller task to a larger task, and particularly a large, very heterogeneously trained task, none of these adaptation work give you a lot of kick because the models themselves are already very solid and hard to move around much. Yes?
Have you also noticed that what works better than what also changes as it changes?
No. The hierarchy remains the same, but the overall level of improvement diminishes.
At least for the first two bars, I have kind of looked at how things change from task to task, and that I found was task dependent.
Did you really?
Which plus factor didn't seem that strange.
Yeah, well, I'm curious to hear about that. You mean comparing PLP versus MFCC?
Yes.
Well,
So up to Wall Street Journal it held, and then when we went to Switchboard, PLP worked better.
MFCC, that may be because it has to do with whether you have really clean speech or degraded speech.
Right.
And PLP...
Sorry. It also has to do with the bandwidth. At 8 kHz, PLP beats everything.
Really? It's conceivable. So most of our stuff is broadband. Well, what about 11025?
Actually, we tried.
It's a sampling frequency inflicted on us by Microsoft.
We tried.
Yeah.
If you get the root compensation correct, PLP works better.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take that back home. We're actually. I mean, I'm a little shocked, to tell you the truth, at how much. Keep in mind that we live here, and it turns out we could be here. And people do these PhD student theses, and then life goes on the next day, and we just completely ignore it. And so, kind of wondering why we don't do more of that. All right. So the next thing I'd talk about is microphone arrays, which I'm going to skip over since you all know that, but I'll show you the slides anyhow. This is I talk a little bit about previous, and then I talk about speech recognition using microphone arrays, leading up to Mike Seltzer's work, which is that. I think you've heard these examples. This is some speech in the room.
22163.
Delay and sunbeam forming.
22163.
And the same utterance using the same number, in fact, the same audio channels, but with Mike's front end gives you
22163.
It's more trebly, so you have to retrain the system on that. But indeed, he does beat out delay and sunbeam forming. Well, this is let's see. Yeah, this is single microphone. This is delay and sum. This is Seltzer's work, and this is close talking mic. I'm sure he showed you all this when he interviewed here about a year and a half ago, and may have talked about it since then, for all I know. So I don't need to sell you on that. I do talk a little bit more about reverberation here, and note that, again, of the algorithms that are out there, at least the ones that I'm aware of, I have no idea what you guys have been doing since then that you haven't told us about yet. But the one thing that is effective, or at least somewhat effective, again from Mike Seltzer's thesis, was breaking down the signal into in subband fashion, processing the subband separately and putting it back together. And you can see, and these are the two critical times, on the two sides of that big steep thing. And there's not much difference at 300, but again, the performance is pretty good. Going from 3 to 470, and that's where the big knee in the curve was. We're going down from about 60 to 40, so that's about a 33% improvement, which is really quite good, especially in reverberation. The downside of Mike's thesis, of course, is that which we don't advertise very loudly, is that it is very computationally intensive. It is dependent on things being stationary. We do not know how much, if it's feasible to do this in a computationally efficient fashion, adapting on the fly. We don't know how badly things fall off or how quickly things fall off when the environment changes. So I'm not going out telling people to adapt the, in a commercial system, but it's something that's it's a technology that probably bears paying some attention to. Let me talk a little bit about physiologically motivated model, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, at least for Lee and quite possibly for a number of the rest of you, but this is something that's worth paying attention to. Here's the typical MATLAB representation of the welcome to DSP utterance. Here's the audio in case you're curious. Welcome to DSP1. And this is what it looks like in the standard CMU Sphinx Kepsler representation. That's what you get when you compute the Kepsler coefficients the way we do and then reconstitute them in the spectrum. And again, if you compare the two of those, you can say a bunch of things. One of them is it's very blurry. Now, part of that is deliberate because, the blurriness comes because we're reducing the number of numbers, which we do both for computational reasons and also because we want to smear across the effect of the vocal tract I'm sorry, the effect of the pitch pulses, and that was one of the original motivations for doing this in the first place. But it's still, it sounds a lot better in paper than when you actually look at it and say, geez, it looks like spectrograms with the glasses off. And, I wouldn't want to have to listen to that if I were listening. The other thing is that as I mentioned earlier in passing, we throw away, some obvious optimizations. The auditory system is built in undoubtedly for decoding speech sounds, having to do with a relationship between frequency selectivity and spectral bandwidth. There are also other things that we don't do, or except in a trivial fashion, are the nonlinear amplitude responses. And a lot of other things that are not represented, including detailed timing structure, lateral suppression, which I think is likely to be important, and also the idea of enhancing temporal contrast, which certainly is a component of natural processing of sounds, as well as other auditory nonlinearities that I used to think were just kind of annoying and getting in the way of understanding the system, but I now am beginning to think are quite functional and worth paying attention to. So here, for example, is, again, a set of results that I'm sure Lee is quite familiar with, but many of the rest of you may not be. This is a classic pair of experiments by Murray Sachs and Eric Young at Johns Hopkins. I think it's part of Eric's thesis. What we're looking at is a synthetic vowel with a spectrum that looks like that. It was created to have harmonics only at multiples of fundamental frequency, so you can play this thing over and over again and get a stable thing that you can run into cats. And these are the average mean rate of firings as a function of loudness of the incoming stimuli. Loudness goes from 28 up to 78 dB. And the take-home message from these curves is that the shape of the curves changes a lot when as loudness changes. Here's the same thing, but instead of using loudness is average localized synchrony measure. Last time I gave this talk, it was at Johns Hopkins about 4 weeks ago, and Eric was there. And I complained to him about how long it took for me to copy his figures and repaste them together in Photoshop so that I could fit them onto a horizontal PowerPoint slide. And I asked him to really focus on ease of presentation next time. But in any case, this is an average localized. I'm not going to tell you what the measure is. I mean, you can read about it, or I can tell you later. But it's not so important. But what it does is it gives you a measure of how well synchronized the response is to input at different frequency ranges. And you can see that this is something that remains remarkably invariant. Now, again, the kind of representations that all of us are using, be they MFCCs, PLPs, or anything else like that, they're all based on mean rate, the energy in little buckets of frequency and time.
Well, now, except that without any saturation. The reason why in the earlier case is because of saturation, but when we do computing program, we don't actually cap them. Yeah. In any case, that problem disappear.
I think, but it's not. I think it's more than that. You are right, but I think in noise it disappears, and
with the noise, it's a different story.
Yeah. With the noise it disappears, and just everything. I think it's more than just saturation, but but you're right, and I'm trying to keep the story simple and blatant, and I'm being a little bit unethical in so doing. But and anyway, timing information I do believe is important, and we're not paying attention to it. This is another analysis, which is I think also another interesting figure that I haven't been able to make much headway on. Maybe you've done better. This is a replot of this by Campbell Searle and one of his students, Heckerwalker or Seckerwalker. Seckerwalker? In any case, similar data. And what we're looking at here are CFs, and the take-home, it's hard for me to see it here. It's easier for me when I step back, so you can see it. But the argument made was that there are kind of bands of responses that are similar. These correspond to formant frequencies, and in fact, he measures these and shows in this paper that they track formant frequencies. And that's actually kind of hard to achieve in computational models. But because the computational models tend to follow the harmonics and not the formants, which is a phenomenon that transcends multiple harmonics. So we're trying to figure out, how to get there from here. Here is, just as an example, it's another speech waveform. That's me saying ah, a, e, o, u. And this is processing using energy only. This is processing using an expansion based on autocorrelation. You can see that the frequency components are a lot better represented. I'd like to be able to tell you that running this kind of representation gives you better recognition accuracy, but so far it hasn't. It's and part of the reason why it looks cleaner is that I have a lot more parameters in there. So, kind of just replaying a representation with a greater number of numbers isn't going to help you in and of itself. There has to be something that pulls out. And I think, as I think Lee does as well, that there's some important things that happen with the nonlinearities. They give you a certain amount of weak signal suppression, which enables you to get, on a band-by-band basis, something that is more representative of only a single sound source. So it's kind of part of nature's way of enabling us to separate sounds.
In the earlier diagram, rather than cross-correlation. If you do cross-correlation between the band, you actually can extract the formula.
Say it again?
Cross-correlation across the band.
Yes?
Would give you enhancement on the formats because the periodicities are very different.
Oh, yeah, no, that's interesting. I'll take a look at that. Thank you. No, that was just autocorrelation within the band.
So you don't explore the whole information. So
Yeah, no, that's a good
actually
point.
did that. I did that in my thesis to show that in the very high signal to noise, low signal to noise, doing cross correlation, it gives almost the same format.
So I assume that you wrote that up in eons ago.
Yeah, that was. Yeah. Actually, it's quite effective, except it's very expensive to compute. So
well, yeah, but computers are cheap now. So are you guys doing that here now?
No.
Why not? It's quite effective, remember?
For vowel, it's good. For consonant, for vowel, it probably it's one. But for consonant, for fricative sound, you don't have that kind of structure.
Well, maybe we'll do it. We're a rich university. You're a poor business. We have lots of computers, spare cycles. No, that's a useful thought because I'm very interested in correlation. Processing based on timing information, such as zero crossings. There have been a number of work that's come out using zero crossing information that I think is interesting. We haven't been able to replicate the successes that other people have gotten. Have you done the zero crossing peak analysis? You tried that? Yeah, well, same here.
But the papers are interesting.
Well, I talked to Paliwal about this. I don't want to degenerate into private conversation. Let me, by the way, it's already 3 o'clock, so are we going to lose the room?
We'll find out.
Yeah.
Keep going, yeah.
I'd like to talk about 10 more minutes if I can. I think we are losing the room.
Yeah.
I'll go check the door.
Well, there's people outside there.
I think there is something coming.
It looks like there are because there are people hovering.
Yeah, we have another group in here in about 20 minutes.
Oh, 20 minutes. Well,
Well, they start in 20 minutes, though.
Okay. 10 minutes. I'll be gone. Okay. So I'd like to say a few words about signal separation based on auditory scene analysis. And I got interested in this for a number of reasons. Actually, I've been interested in it for a long time, but the particular motivating force was the problem that we have in dealing with speech and music. So a lot of groups, especially Sheffield, again, where a lot of interesting work is coming from, have been working to extract cues identified by Al Bregman to separate and group auditory fragments that are believed to arise from different sources. As I think many of you know, Al Bregman is a cognitive psychologist at McGill. He wrote a very influential book called Auditory Scene Analysis. It's actually a very tedious book to get through, but there's a lot of stuff in there in which he identifies a lot of factors that are believed to facilitate segregation and grouping of sounds and things. So some of the cues that he discusses are fundamental frequency and harmonicity, sound localization based on timing differences or internal correlation, along with common frequency and amplitude modulation, common offset and onset, and what we have so far are just kind of at the tip of the iceberg, but I wanted to talk about a few things that we've been looking at to apply that, and I'll be fast since we have to go soon. And I'll also be fast because we don't have a great deal to show for it yet, but some of it's interesting, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to share that. One of the key things is separating things by pitch. And of course, I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of early work done on comb filtering and wasn't that successful. But people are starting to reevaluate that. So for example, one simple thing that you can do is you can take a signal, track the pitch somehow, and I don't do that in a very interesting way. I use other people's work for that. And then run a heterodyne filter that at different harmonics that isolates the amplitudes of the partials as they evolve over time at the harmonic frequencies. So for example, here's an original speech signal.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc.
And reconstructing it just from the harmonics itself gives you something like.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc.
There are only a finite number of these. It's not quite as intelligible, but you can kind of hear what's going on. This is woman. This is actually Stephanie, who's getting married this weekend. She was here, wasn't she?
Not this particular case. Tom apologized. Whitmore.
I think she worked here for a summer as well. And here's her reconstruction.
Not this particular case. Tom apologized. Whitmore.
Again, you lose the high frequencies because there are only a small number of harmonics there. These are the two together.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc.
And if you can track the individual, frequencies, which we can't, but other people claim to be able to, you can separate them.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc.
So that was the combined signal, just reconstructing based with the heterodyne from the male. The female isn't as good.
Not this particular case. Apologize. Whitmore.
That's always going to be a problem because you can imagine the male has a lower F0, so the harmonics are closer together. The female starts up here. If you have a female masking a male, you're going to have a few relatively widely spaced harmonics in the upper end, whereas the male masking the female, you have a denser you're going to have a denser masker, and it's also going to clobber the lower frequencies, which have more intelligibility. So that's a tough problem. So I guess the name of the game is if you want to be understood, speak low. And you'll punch through.
But what if you're dealing with this unvoiced sound where your pitch could be extract? Is that going to give you?
Yeah, we just excited by noise then. And of course you're going to lose. Yeah.
But you have to detect voice from.
Yeah, well that's obviously a problem. So which is one reason why I'm not showing you a lot of recognition results, but these are real recognition results, and this is. Small improvement. This is baseline. This is a study we did last summer. This is about a 2 or 3 dB improvement. And if we actually had oracle knowledge, this was using blind estimation of the pitch, and then reconstructing using the heterodyne reconstruction, and then going from there. If we actually had blind pitch information, we get from here all the way over to here. And so there is a small practical benefit, and that's kind of orthogonal to everything else that we do. So it's worth pursuing. I'm sorry that we're not following that up. I'm also very interested in sound separation by source location. Partly my own original work was in binaural hearing, so this is always something that's kind of close to the bone for me. I'm not going to go into too much, but we can say that, let me just say that just as you well know, you can approximate the auditory system in the periphery as a bank of bandpass filters. The next thing that happens you can approximate is cross-correlation of all the filter outputs. And then just by presumably looking at different correlation lags, you get different input. And so I did a reconstruction to just kind of imagine, and this was some work that, again, Tom Sullivan, Alex's cohort did. I presented this in 1994 or something like that. I think you might have been at that meeting. That was at ATO.
4 years input rather than 2 years.
No, this is 2 years input. Well, actually, basically what I do is I don't stop with 2 ears. I take a microphone array system and say, think of that as a metaphor for a living being with like 8 or 15 ears, and just do the same kind of cross-correlation processing that we do, but with more than 2 sensors. So there's no reason to stop at 2, particularly if you're a brain-damaged machine. You need all the help you can get. So this is a representation of a vowel ah, actually. You don't recognize it as not because it's frequency warped. And as a function of S and R as you go from back to front. And this is the original thing with the noise coming from the same azimuth with 2 inputs. This is 2 inputs, but now a spatial separation between the signal and the noise. And you can see there's a better preservation. And then with 8 inputs, again, 8 microphones, you get the shape is almost completely preserved. And when we did this experiment in 1994, we found that with a lot of computation, you can get a small improvement in performance. That was Tom's PhD thesis, and since it was a lot of computation, it was a small improvement, we didn't really continue at the time. I have been kind of resurrecting that, though, and I want to just play a couple of audio samples for you. This is signals combined with, again, different putative arrival times, the same 2 signals you heard. And again, another caveat is that these were just artificially combined with delays, which is not what the real situation is. It's a lot harder to deal with real with real things, but until you can deal with the fake things effectively, you don't have any prayer for the real things. So it still is a good starting point. We learn a lot. So here are those two voices that you heard before. Brian.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steele, etc.
And Stephanie.
Not at this particular case, Tom, apologized Whitmore.
Okay, together. And
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steele, etc.
Now, on the left-hand column is enhancement of the male, and the right-hand by female. I'm going to go down the column. The first is delay in sunbeam forming, and the second is separating by the cross-correlation display. And the third is, in addition to that, some what I call straightness weighting across frequency, which is something I've been championing for in my life as a scholar of binaural hearing. And again, I'm searching for the cursor. Come on. Here it is. All right, so here's the delay in sunbeam forming.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steele, etc.
You can hear the other signal kind of rattling around there. This is correlation. Damn. Is there a secret to getting it to come back? Now. It's PowerPoint, not the operating system. Here we go.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steele, etc. Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steele, etc.
As you go from top to bottom, there's less secondary signal in there. And on the third case, there's more distortion of the desired signal, though. So it's not clear what's going to win out. I'll play you going the other way, too. This is...
Not at this particular case, Tom, apologized Whitmore. Not at this particular case, Tom, apologized Whitmore. Not at this particular case, Tom, apologized Whitmore.
The female is always hard to bring out. But in any case, it does get better. Now, I'd like to tell you that we get concomitant. Certainly, this sounds better than that, and this is arguable. I'd like to tell you that this gives us better recognition accuracy than that, but so far it hasn't.
I don't understand how you recover the signal from correlation, because mathematically you can prove. I can have a little debate with.
Maybe we can follow up the question.
Yeah. Let me just get through one more set of things. We can talk offline because I do want to get out before the hook comes.
Before they kick you out.
Yeah. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and that's signal separation using micromodulation, and these are amplitude and frequency differences. How many of you have heard of John Chowning? He's the guy. He's a music professor at Stanford, computer music. One of the main movers of the Stanford Computer Music Lab, which is one of the most interesting anywhere. And one of his big claim to things is that he invented frequency modulation as a musical instrument construction technique. And that was before sampling became popular in the in the late 80s, early 90s. That was the way everybody built musical instruments. Anyway, Chowning has done a bunch of interesting things, and one was a demo that he gave during a talk that he gave at CMU in 1981 that I invited him for, and which I'm going to replay for you. I reconstructed it. What you're going to hear is first 3 sine waves at 300, 400, 500 hertz. Now, because the auditory system tries to synthesize this pitch from the most likely fundamental frequency, you're going to hear that as a 100 hertz signal. Then you're going to hear actually, Alex has already heard this once or twice before, I think. At least once, maybe twice. You're going to hear 10 harmonics on top of that. So there are going to be 10 multiples of 30, 10 multiples of 40, the 10 multiples of, 300, 400, and 500. Of course, the fourth multiple of 300 is the same as the third multiple of 400. So you don't exactly get 30 different components there, but you get, nevertheless, you're going to get nominally 30, and actually a little less than that, maybe 25 or so, 20 to 25. And again, it's going to still sound at 100 hertz because that's still the fundamental frequency. But then in this section here, I start frequency modulating separately the 300 hertz, the 400 hertz, and the 500 hertz. And then you're going to hear them kind of segregate apart, and you'll hear a melody emerge from that. Is what you hear. Those are different things on the harmonic sequence. I'll play that one more time. what that illustrates is that what we're doing is we're paying separate attention to these things because they have separate micromodulations. It just happens that that's the easiest one to demonstrate. I can do the same thing with amplitude modulation, but it's not as effective. Well, I'll take that. One of the things that we've also been trying to do is to try to segregate signals according to instantaneous frequency modulation, and then use that to find frequency channels that are different, that are kind of correlated, and then use that to reconstruct the signal. So here again is the same example you've been hearing, but separated according to just frequency modulation only.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc. Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc. Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc.
Okay, it kind of sounds weird because you're losing. There's no voicing information. It's just a reconstruction of the harmonics. But except for the end, when the male actually ends earlier than the female, you can still hear what he said.
Author of The Danger Trail, Philip Steels, etc.
And again, that's completely blind, not even using fundamental frequency. That's only reconstructing from the modulations. So those are examples of the kinds of things that we're trying to exploit, but we're not very far along, and I don't know how far we'll get, but we're trying. So to summarize, again, low SNRs, reverberated speech maskers, music maskers are tough problems. Robust algorithms like the ones that Alex did work well for stationary noise and filtering, but not in the presence of transients. Some other techniques that are more effective, including missing feature reconstruction, combination of complementary sources of knowledge, microphone arrays. Computational advances now actually enable practical feature extraction based on auditory physiology and perception. And computational auditory scene analysis shows some promise for signal separation problems. But quite frankly, the field is in its infancy. I personally believe that techniques like missing features and auditory scene analysis is where most of the action is going to be in the next decade to come, and along with the kind of stuff that you're doing here in spontaneous speech. I think those are the most interesting things that are out there right now. So thank you very much. Again, I apologize for being late. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for bearing with us for running over. And I suggest we continue the discussion in the halls.
Okay,
yeah.
let's thank the speaker.